Well, it looks like Joe Rogan is starting to backpedal some now and try to distance himself from Elon Musk after his podcast fell to the number four position, and the Midas Touch podcast is now the number one podcast. It seems to be like now that Joe Rogan is starting to try to return to being the sensible, reasonable dude that a lot of us felt like he was years ago. That's the thing about Joe Rogan that has been extremely disappointing, is because I did listen to Joe for years, and I did find him to be a reasonable guy and a good conversationalist. And when he had someone on his show who I found interesting, I thought that he was very good at having a conversation with them and bringing the best out of that person. And there were certain episodes that I would go back and watch more than once. Like, that was a great interview. I really enjoyed that. But I wasn't watching every single show. I wasn't keeping tabs on everything he was saying. And so I did have some friends start to say to me, but Brando, did you know he said this? Or did you hear that he believes this? And I started saying, really? And then he just begins getting more and more deeper into the weeds with his conspiracy theories, especially since COVID. And then he embraced and endorsed Donald Trump, which is something that he said originally that he wouldn't do. He said he had no desire to help him. But then Dana White twisted his arm and helped him, and now he's starting to dial it back now that he's fell to number four. And we're going to watch a couple of clips here. In this first clip, I'm going to bring this one up. He is actually reading a Twitter post from the House of Carter. And let's take a look at this together.
This is a guy that explains it. I'll read this. I hope he's correct. This is a gentleman named House of Carter on X. He said, this isn't a vampire conspiracy. It's just COBOL, C-O-B-O-L. Legacy government systems, especially Social Security, still rely on COBOL, a language designed before anyone thought databases would need to track people beyond 99 years old. The numbers you're laughing at aren't literal ages. They're most likely misinterpreted categorical codes or data artifacts from outdated formatting. Social Security isn't paying 150-year-olds. The system uses fixed width fields, and when modern databases misread them, they mistakenly interpret grouping codes as real ages. This happens when old mainframe logic isn't properly translated into newer systems. So no, there aren't thousands of people over 150 getting checks, but there are a lot of outdated systems that need modernization. Maybe focus on fixing that issue instead of hyping up a non-issue. So there's multiple people that have said the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay, now that right there, folks, is the Joe Rogan that I used to remember. And that's the Joe Rogan that from time to time I would catch myself defending and going, wait a minute, no, he can be a reasonable dude. And right there, he is being reasonable and pointing out that these things Elon is posting, no, people that are 150 years old aren't getting Social Security checks. But I want to play this clip here too. Let me find this other one really quick here and bring this up, because here he is. Also, he goes a little bit further here with the clip, and right here's the part where he does begin to call out Elon for being hyperbolic. I want us to take a look at this one together as well.
Now they're talking about Social Security.
Yeah.
And that people are receiving Social Security that are 150 years old. But I don't think that is the reality as it's being explained by people who understand COBOL, the language, and this computer programming language that they use is ancient, right? Which is kind of crazy that they're still using that, right?
It's the government. I mean,
right.
Yeah.
So some guy who understands it was explaining that if certain factors aren't taken into consideration or certain things aren't entered in, like date of birth or when there's certain things,
or date of death, or,
right? But it doesn't even necessarily mean that all these people are receiving checks.
Right. They're just listed on the files,
right?
And it doesn't mean money's going out to them. And so, again, from a messaging perspective, does Elon need to screenshot that and then send it out as a tweet or whatever we call X nowadays, and then suddenly you've got a couple million people going, oh my God, we're paying dead people. Well,
right. That's the problem with being hyperbolic.
Oh, did you hear that? That's the problem with being hyperbolic. So again, that is the Joe Rogan that I remember, a guy who would be reasonable and call out stuff, even if it was his friends. But in my mind, on all fairness here, it's just too little too late. I really feel like now it comes off. It's the timing of it. He fell from the number one spot in the podcast world, and now suddenly he wants to return to being reasonable. I go by it this way. I look at people like take a Bernie Sanders, who, by the way, Joe Rogan did endorse before, and as far as I know, voted for. Take a Bernie Sanders, for example. Bernie has been saying the same thing for 50 years. Bernie has been fighting for the same causes and going out there and preaching the same message for the last 50 years, and he's stood strong. You don't have to agree with everything Bernie says. Maybe Bernie might be too extreme for some of you, or maybe Bernie's not extreme enough for some other people, but he has been saying the same message all these years, and that message has got popular at times, and we saw Bernie performing in front of huge crowds at one point. And we saw those ideas get drowned out by people like Donald Trump. But Bernie has been preaching the same message this entire time. Someone like a Joe Rogan always plays to whatever room and whatever audience he's in front of. He's not a controversial, or not, I shouldn't say controversial, I meant confrontational. He's not a confrontational interviewer. No matter who he's interviewing, he sits back and he lets them talk, and he's reasonable with them in that moment. But it seems as though he goes wherever the momentum is going. And when the momentum began going toward Donald Trump, and all the bro podcasters started diving on, and people like Dana White and Elon Musk started encouraging him to get behind Trump, he did. And then he saw his podcast drop. And now he's, well, now wait a minute, hold on. Maybe he shouldn't be posting these things. Maybe that looks sort of hyperbolic. And to me, it's just a little too late. Because if you really stood on your principles, you would stand on them the entire time. If you were reasonable, you would remain reasonable. People that are reasonable when it's fitting and then throws all voices of reason out the window when they can get ahead, I can't respect that. And there was too many people that he let sit down in that chair, and he interviewed, and he gave them a platform and gave them credibility. Joe Rogan does have one of the biggest platforms in this world. And there were a lot of people, I'm not even going to name their names, but there were a lot of conspiracy theorists. There were a lot of doctors who were barred and banned. And we were in the middle, this is the thing, we were in the middle of a global pandemic. It wasn't just something that was happening here in the United States. It was something that was happening around the world. Joe always said that he was just trying to have conversations with people, that he just wanted to hear everybody out and hear everyone's opinions on things. Well, okay, if you're talking with Dan Aykroyd about aliens, that was a highly entertaining episode. I think I listened to it more than once. I loved hearing Dan Aykroyd and Joe talk about aliens. I loved it also when I heard when I heard Joe Rogan talking with country singer Sturgill Simpson, and they talked about DMT, and they talked about psychedelics and psilocybin. I enjoyed those episodes. When he had Tom O'Neill, who wrote the Charles Manson book Chaos, and they talked about all the different possible things that could have happened to the Manson murders, that was very entertaining. And guess what? Not one person died from having a conspiracy theory about the Manson family and those murders. If I have my own theory about what happened on the night that the Manson family went wild, that theory that I have isn't going to hurt anyone. But we were in the middle of a global pandemic, and so when Joe sits down and speaks with conspiracy theorists and with doctors who have been barred and banned, and says, well, I was just trying to have a reasonable conversation, there was people sitting back on the ropes listening to that who probably, I know too personally, that truly did need medical help and did not listen to their doctor. They preferred to listen to podcasts like that, and they ended up dying because of it. And so that's why that it's always going to be tough for me to watch Joe Rogan now. And it's going to be tough for me to give him any credit now that he's decided to go, oh, yeah, let me be reasonable here. Maybe Elon shouldn't be so hyperbolic, and maybe Elon should stop posting these things the way he is. It's kind of like, well, yeah, but I buried two people that bought into your rhetoric. One of the last conversations that I had with someone I dearly love, they said to me, well, that guy you listened to had a dude on his podcast. Yeah, I know. And it's often made me regret ever recommending this podcast to anyone. So that's the boat that I'm in with it and will always be. And maybe he will turn around, and maybe he will become more reasonable. Maybe he will start to call out Elon and Trump more. And maybe he will bring progressives and other people on and maybe balance things out. But I will never forget what happened. And I will never forget that it just, to me, the whole thing comes off opportunist. The whole thing comes off grifter. If all you do is latch on to the next thing. When Donald Trump became president, the next video that I made after that, I said, folks, this doesn't change a thing. We still have our principles. We're still going to stand on those principles. This is what that I believe in, and I still believe in it today. I believed in it the day before the election. I believed in it the day after. I said, folks, this is the hill I'm willing to die on. Might not always be popular. It might not always be the thing that people wants to hear, but this is what I believe, and this is what I stand on, and just because he won an election doesn't mean a damn thing. I said that, and I continue to say that. Now, if I'd have suddenly switched like some people on the left did and suddenly began wanting to have beers with MAGA, I could totally understand someone not taking me serious when I came back later when we were winning. So that's the way I feel about it. To me, Joe Rogan was a guy that I used to really enjoy listening to. It was good to see him being reasonable again, but when he had the chance to really be reasonable, when he had the chance to really paint Donald Trump for who he really is, he chose to gaslight us all into acting like that the whole thing was normal, and it never was.